Okay, so we got all our components onto the sheet, and now we're going to take them one by one very quickly and start to put them on the PCB. Because we already primed the PCB itself, it's going to be pretty fast and pretty much easy. Again, we set the hot air soldering iron to 375 degrees, and we start soldering. We heat up the pad and we place the component onto the pad. You will see that because we already have flux onto the PCB, it's gonna snap onto place pretty easily. And you will also notice that because the air which is passing through the PCB is gonna take away most of the flux, we just put some more. And the component slowly, you see, and it's already in the PCB. Normally when you do components one by one and you take them onto a PCB, because the area itself is already heated up, this is done faster. So let's say we take the same component now and we place it nearby onto the next one, you see, and this is done pretty easily. And you can do the same thing for the rest of them. For instance, you can place it here and it will snap onto place like that. And this is done the same way for the resistors, capacitors and other components. Now, most of the tutorials we have seen show you how to solder maybe a SOIC component or a capacitor or a resistor or even a through-hole component. But let's say when you have something like this, which is a 0.4 millimeter spacing component, and you need to solder it onto the PCB itself. Now, normally this is done by a rework oven, and the components are placed through a pick and place machine. But because again we assemble the entire PCB manually in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how it's done manually with a simple soldering iron. Again, before we do anything, we need to prime the pads. Now we put some flux onto the pads, and the flux we use helps us most of the time, because as you will see, there are almost never shortages from the first time you will pass the soldering iron through the pads. So you make a small dip here into the soldering iron, and then you go like that. You see, there are no shortages onto the pads. This is because we put flux onto it. And we do the same thing here. Again, because the PCB is already ROH, hustle finished, this normally would not even need to be done, but just in case we like to do it. Okay, now that we primed the pads, we need to place the component onto it. Now we take the component, because you see we already have some holes here which align to the component itself, because it has notches which go into those holes. You will place it roughly in the place which you're gonna align it to, and you start slowly to align it to the pads. Okay, you see it sticks a bit to the tweezer because we have some soldering flux onto it. Okay, it seems to be fine there. Also, this is a tricky part, because as you will see, this is a gum stick board, and you see the spacing between the connectors themselves need to be exact, because if it's not exact, the whole thing is not going to snap onto the PCB itself, so it has to be pretty much center. Okay, now we need to tap this into place so it doesn't move while we are going to be soldering it. So this is what we do. We take our soldering iron and we just place some solder on the sides. Now it's okay that it's shorted, don't worry about it, we shall fix it later on. This is done very easily. And we do the same thing on the other side. Now because we already tapped them from one side, we are going to take the tweezer and we're going to hold it down just to make sure that it touches the pads themselves. Okay. Now, this is, you may think that this is difficult, but actually this is the easiest part. And whatever short we're gonna have here is gonna be fixed in a matter of seconds. Okay, so what we do is we place flags all over the parts. We take our soldering iron, we clean it up a bit. Now we just put nice and a lot of soldering iron there. Yeah. Okay, now take your tweezer and hold the component down. This will ensure that when you heat up the parts, they actually touch a bit more to the PCB itself. It's just to ensure that they are connected. Now, take your soldering iron and leave it there for just a few seconds. Okay, and now start to slide it. You see how they nicely heat up? Oh, and the only short we have is actually here. So now we're gonna clean up the soldering iron, and because the only short we have is here, we're gonna take our wick and we are going to take a bigger soldering tip just because it heats up faster, and we're going to place it onto our part and heat it up, and it's gonna suck all of that excessive soldering iron. Yep, that's it. Just put some flux onto it so that the remaining solder spreads up nicely over parts, and that's it. The entire connector is already soldered on, and you may see this. I'm not sure how well it shows on the camera, but it's soldered on pretty nicely. And you do the same thing on the other side. Now, you will see that this connector, this is done easily on this connector because the parts are too close together, and when you have the flux on them, the solder actually snaps pretty easily and doesn't short out. It will only short if you don't have enough flux on it, and we use a lot of that thing, so it's easy enough for us. Now, for a pad which is 0.5 millimeters, which you will see that it has a bit more spacing, you will need to use the soldering iron itself, unless you have the necessary equipment to solder it on, like a soldering oven. You will need to heat up and solder the part to the PCB.